Welcome everyone! Some of you may have seen the last devlog, some of you may have not. So here's a quick recap. I am making a grappling game where the main goal is to climb as high as possible. In the last devlog I added several new grappling crossbow variations and a drone enemy. Speaking of enemies, that's exactly what I continued working on. First, I created another enemy, the Penetrator. It moves along the ground, makes some very disturbing noises, and penetrates you when you get too close. I also felt that the enemy hits didn't feel responsive enough, so I added new sounds and effects. Now that the enemies were improved, I felt the player deserved something to help deal with them, so I added a really overpowered item. Honestly, I think I'll have to nerf it or make it like extremely rare, because with this item the player can gain more lives. Once used, it increases a stat. This stat prevents the player from dying when their health reaches 0. And it's stackable, which makes it really strong. But after giving the player something this powerful, I also felt like I had to give them something even stronger. So I made a new crossbow, the Upgrader. At least that's what I'm calling it. With this crossbow, the more enemies you kill, the stronger you get. Every 10 kills, the player gets a random stat increase. Of course, without including the extra life stat. So now the player is really strong, which means I had to take something away from them. For example, there was a bug that allowed the player to fly higher the fewer frames they had. Basically, if someone was playing on a potato PC, they could jump to the end of the map using just one jump pad. Obviously that broke the game, so I fixed it. And I also discovered something else that could have led the game to its downfall. I didn't have customizable keybinds. And after watching one video telling me that without them my game is doomed, I added them. Now that all of that was out of the way, I can finally present the biggest change since the last devlog. With all these upgrades, the player had become way too powerful, and winning the game started feeling too easy, so I needed something at the end of the game that could ruin your whole run. So I made a boss enemy. For that, I had to first make a mesh, using my incredible modeling abilities. Then I added bones, so the boss could actually move and be animated. Once that was done, I started texturing, because I hate animating. So I textured the mesh to the best of my abilities. Now that the textures looked really good, I could finally animate my creation. But what even is the creation I made? I can't even tell myself, and I'm the creator. Feel free to comment boss name ideas and I'll display the chosen one above the health bar. But enough about that. Let's move on to the animations. I made very simple animations thinking I'd improve them later. So far I haven't. I made some attack animations for sword attacks, fire attacks, and a gravity attack for a special reason that I'm gonna explain later on, and one looping movement / hovering animation. I'll definitely have to expand on them in the future. Now that the boss setup was done, I moved on to the logic behind the boss. For testing, I just set up a simple AI that moves towards the player and does different attacks depending on the player's distance to the boss. If you stand right next to it, it uses the sword attack. At medium distance, it uses the fire attack, which doesn't really work yet. And if you're even further away, it fires rockets. The force they're shot with depends on how far the player is from the rockets. If the player is in the air, so they can't just hang from a rock and cheese the fight, the gravity attack, which I haven't set up yet, gets triggered. I also plan to add another attack that pulls the player towards the boss so he can't just stay away. Lastly, I made a phase transition ability. The boss spawns 4 generators and a shield. The player must destroy the generators in order to break the shield and damage the boss again. I might improve or add things to this phase transition later. For the second phase, which I haven't made yet, I want to upgrade the existing attacks, like a bigger explosion radius for the rockets or burning effects for the fire, and I also would like to add 2 new attacks. And I think that sums up everything I added since the last devlog. In future devlogs I plan to cover the remaining boss content, maybe procedural map generation and a simple multiplayer system. Thank you for watching, bye.